Let's check in with Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine.
We know about this story, the story of this war, this fight for freedom, because we are participants in these events. But there will be a lot of people who no longer remember like we do.
Little Joe Lindsley.
Joe Lindsley is quickly becoming an American treasure in broadcasting.
Welcome to Ukraine Bank.
Is there a shift in the Biden administration policy about allowing Ukraine to attack inside Russia with U.S. weapons? Let's get more on that from Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine. And Joe, as I mentioned to you yesterday as we were signing off, quite a few emails and texts from listeners along the lines of this one. God bless Joseph, but he needs to acknowledge the reality that U.S. weapons cannot be used to attack Russia, since it would be a default war between the United States and Russia. What is your perspective on all this?
Well, Bob, good afternoon from Lviv. There was yet another major Russian missile and drone attack throughout Ukraine last night. So we had alarms around 4 o'clock this morning. But instead of hitting cities, the Russians it seemed to be hitting infrastructure, perhaps weapons depots. They are trying to find weapons in the West and target those places. They're also working to hit Ukrainian infrastructure. So that happened through the night. But as we look at this question, there's a couple of things to consider. For one, this is in light of the news that the White House is now saying that Ukraine will have permission to use surface-to-air missile systems on Russian territory. So what this means is that Ukrainians, right now, for example, when Russians launch guided bombs and rockets to Kharkiv, they do that from planes in the safety over the Russian Federation. Now, Washington is saying, okay, Ukraine in these limited areas will be able to hit those Russian targets before they attack Ukrainian cities. And, if you look at how, so the first question is sort of what the question for the diplomats, how do people save face? How do people define things? And already, American weapons have been used these past 2 years to hit Russian military targets on occupied Ukrainian territory. But if you look at, the Russian constitution, because of the changes Putin made, these occupied Ukrainian territories, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, etc., according to the Russian constitution, that is already the Russian Federation. And so there's a bit of a semantic game here. I mean, the Russians are claiming these portions of Ukraine, which Ukrainians, are fighting. Ukrainians are still using American weapons to hit Russian targets on these territories that Russia claims is totally part of the Russian Federation. The same with the Crimean Peninsula. And in fact, last night, or actually in the early hours this morning, there was a lot of activity down in the Crimean Peninsula with Ukrainian drones. There's that famous Kerch Bridge that Putin built connecting mainland Russia to the Crimean Peninsula. And there was a fire on the Russian side of that strait. It's a strait of water that connects the Black Sea to the Sea of Azov. And there's a Russian oil depot on the Russian mainland that was on fire. And then it seems that there were 7 Russian boats that were damaged or destroyed, including 2 ferries that were thought to be carrying weapons. So this was a lot of activity using Ukrainian drones in the Crimean Peninsula. But the United States has this past month and a half given Ukraine permission to use American weapons to hit any Russian military target in the Crimean Peninsula. And so I think the first question is one of semantics. Is there a major change in kind by simply allowing Ukraine to use American weapons to hit places in Belgorod, which is the Russian region just north of Kharkiv? But I think the second thing is, if you look at, I think first everyone, because we've seen today in response to the signals and the pressure on Washington to let Ukraine fight back, the Putin and the Kremlin, of course, is running to that. They're using the nuclear word, and they're saying, Europe and America better be careful, because if you ratchet this up, we're going to go nuclear. And they do that every time. And so I think the first question that is a sort of an interior question everyone has to ask, what is the alternative? If you simply, back down every time Russia says nuclear, what kind of world does that create? And what will be the consequences of that? So first, you have to consider that question, which can be difficult. And secondly, you have to look at what's happened in the past 2 years. Despite, look at all the red lines that the Kremlin announced. I mean, go back to the first days of the full-scale invasion when the West was, thinking about sending some small weapons, and Kremlin was threatening America back then, and weapons arrived. The attackings that recently arrived in Ukraine, these long-range weapons, the White House said in the summer of 2022 that they didn't want to send them to Ukraine because they were afraid of World War III. Well, now 2 years later, they're sending them, and we see that those weapons that have arrived here have been used to hit Russians, again, not only in Crimea but also in occupied Ukrainian territory. And I think if you look, one of the major things if you look at was Ukraine's attack using British weapons, so weapons from the West last fall on the headquarters of Russia's naval fleet. A major blow for Russia. It forced Russia to move its entire the headquarters of its Black Sea fleet from Crimea, hundreds of miles away across the Black Sea to Russian mainland. And, everyone, I think, who was worried about Russian red lines would have thought that such a strike with British Storm Shadow missiles on the headquarters of the Russian Navy in Crimea, that would have led to some, very strong reaction from Russia. But we saw quite the contrary. In fact, what we had last fall, there was a decline in Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities, and perhaps because Russia was devoting resources to trying to save its navy. So obviously these questions are not easy, but I think it comes down to those two things. One, first, what is the consequence then of allowing the nuclear threats to rule the day? And two, what does happen when Ukraine does push back against Russia? Is Russia weaker or stronger as a result?
Good questions to think about. Joseph, we have to send you a photo one of our listeners sent with this message. I want to share this picture with Bob of me and Joseph Lindsley's friends at the Soldier Field 10K last weekend. Thank you, Jen from Buffalo Grove. And there's a nice picture of a couple of people who obviously participated in that event, which was very successful, Joe.
Yeah, it was great to hear this. There were Ukrainian warriors who had been wounded in battle, who were there at Soldier Field running that race, and this gives great encouragement to everyone here and to keep the people of Chicago connected. And do we have how much time do we have, Bob? So I forget if do we have a few seconds?
About a half a minute for you here,
because I want to share with you this story about Iryna Cheka. She is Cheka is her nickname. She was a combat medic with the famed Hospitaliers unit, Ukrainian medics, and she was killed in the Kharkiv region while she was going to save people's lives. She was due to turn 26 on June 1st in just a few days, and so she was 25 years old. This example of facing her fears to help those in need. And some of the last words that she wrote, she said, "The only choice of in a country at war, the only choice is about freedom. The only story in a country at war is about the volia, the holy will to be free. The volia, everything's about the struggle for that will." She said, "I realized recently this trend that we're all going to die soon. That trend has been very loud, and everybody's getting ready to die somewhere sooner or later. I want to have children. I want a house. I want to plant tomatoes. But ending the war is the most important thing. Memory strategy is needed. Memory forms society. This is what we do, not for ourselves, but for future generations. We know about this story, the story of this war, this fight for freedom, because we are participants in these events. But there will be a lot of people who will no longer remember like we do." And then she concludes, "The most important thing is the dead. The most important thing is the deed, is our actions right now. Stories are meant to teach us to fight for justice, to punish evil, and to sacrifice for others. War is the worst place I have ever been, but it gives a ticket to real life, to a world of unadulterated independence. It imparts knowledge of the impermanence of existence." Those are some of the last words of Iryna, nicknamed Cheka, Ukrainian medic, killed while saving lives in the Kharkiv region.
So heroic. Thank you for bringing us those important words, Joseph. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Что он сказал?
Well, which side are you on?
на чій ти стороні. Come on now. Oh, which side are you on? На чій ти стороні.